Thank you so much for coming this evening. It's very exciting to start out our new year as LexCAN. This is a very timely and urgent climate conversation that we're going to have with Senator Mike Barrett and Select Board Member Mark Sandeen, two of our superstar leaders on climate change in Lexington. Thank you to Marcia Jens and Jean Krieger who made tonight happen. This is LexCAN's first event of the year, and with our new name, the Lexington Climate Action Coalition. Coalition, hangover from the past, Lexington Climate Action Network. We used to be the Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition, and we have switched our name. So it will, normally you'll see LexCAN or Lexington Climate Action Network. We'll say formally GWAC for a while until everybody gets the hang of it. Our motto is to educate, advocate, and collaborate. And tonight is a wonderful collaboration of many people in our community, especially Mark Sandeen and Mike Barrett. Here are some events that are coming up. These are the ones we have dates for. We have many other events planned. I'm not going to linger on this. You can either take a picture of it or a screenshot, but I'll add this to the chat later. So if you want to keep up with us, or put your name and email address and tell us you want to be added to our LexCAN mailing list so that you know about all the events that are coming up. And we're going to be doing a series you'll see up in the upper right-hand corner. It says C4. Those are our climate change community conversations. And this is our first one. So Senator Barrett. Senator Barrett's been on the front lines of climate change since, well, very way back. I said years ago, Senator Barrett came to a GWAC event and he had just begun this current term in the Senate. And he was very clear at that point that he was focused on addressing climate change with bold action. And here we are today. Senator Barrett's Senate Bill number 9, the Next Generation Climate Bill, was passed overwhelmingly at the State House and signed by the governor. This is now the law of Massachusetts. Thank you, Senator Barrett, for delivering on your goals. You are a climate hero. Senator Barrett represents Bedford, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Concord, Lincoln, Waltham, Weston, and large parts of Lexington and Sudbury. Select Board Member Mark Sandeen has been charging forward on climate change since around 2005. And that's when I met him. So it could have happened before that, Mark. You'll have to fill us in on that. He started as a passionate community member, came to GWAC meetings, and then he began and became chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee. He began with a bang. In 2013, Mark brought to town meeting a warrant article that said that all relevant decisions in Lexington must take climate change into account. I joined town meeting so I could vote yes on that particular warrant article. Now, as a select board member, Mr. Sandeen is working on all issues in Lexington, always with an eye toward health and resiliency. Mark is all things sustainable. And last, Cindy Ahrens will be moderating tonight's question and answer period. After Senator Barrett and Mark Sandeen each speak for 20 minutes, Cindy, who is a town meeting member of Precinct 3 on the Sustainable Lexington Committee, the Clean Heat Alliance, and the LPS Green Teams, will monitor the conversations. She'll collect your questions in the chat and she'll address them to Mr. Sandeen, Senator Barrett, or both of you. So, as I said, I will let you know when you have 5 minutes in. And now I think my question to both Senator Barrett and Mr. Sandeen is, where do we go from here and how can we help? So, Senator Barrett, you're on.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible. I'm very pleased to be here, Ricky, with you and with Cindy and with Mark Sandeen, and with everyone who's made time in their evening to discuss climate questions. I try to remind myself every day in the Senate or in the district that we can boil this climate issue down to a few essentials. It can also get very complicated. But fundamentally, the world experts and observers agree that to get this climate issue under control, we need to do three things very well and very intensely. We need to green the grid, the electricity system that we see all around us, and that currently is dirty in the sense that 52% of our electricity here in Massachusetts is generated, for example, actually a little more than that by natural gas, and other amounts by the other fossil fuels. So we are dependent at the moment, all of us, on a dirty grid. We've got to clean it up, green it, as they say, using wind and solar and other means of renewable. And then we have to route that green juice through our transportation system and our building system. Once you do that, once you green the grid, green transportation and green buildings, you've got the problem licked. The devil, of course, lies in the details, and the details really do bedevil us and challenge all of us. But reducing the question to greening the grid, greening transportation, and greening heating brings the problem home to my house and to yours, to your neighborhood, to your workplace, to the place where your kids go to school. Greening the grid, as I've mentioned, means substituting for, especially for natural gas, but also for residual use of oil. And if you talk about the New England grid, even coal. Greening buildings really talks about a very difficult issue. Most of us haven't even heard of the term heat pumps unless we're really into this stuff. And yet electric heat pumps fueled by a green electric system need to substitute for the heating oil on which you rely and the natural gas on which many, many of us here in Lexington and throughout Massachusetts rely. Greening transportation, consider what it will take in terms of affordability and in terms of inclination and habit and preference for every car on your street, every car on every driveway or pulled out in front of your apartment building, for every car to be an electric vehicle. I mean, what would it take not to see the occasional Tesla, but to see every car on your block electric rather than dependent on gasoline? And for that matter, what would it take, if you can get your mind around it, if we can, for every heating system in your basement not to be oil dependent, not to use natural gas, as I've said, but to use these heat pumps concerning which we know so little. The job for the state legislature and the job for the US Congress, for the president, for the governor, and for town government here is to answer those three questions. How do we green the grid? How do we green transportation? How do we green buildings? And you can readily see when you think about it that while levels of government can be very active, this really depends on decision-making at the level of the neighborhood, right? We need to make the possibilities affordable, but in the end, there needs to be brand awareness. Let's talk about EVs, electric vehicles, because I've just been working on the problem today in the legislature. Again, what will it take until electric vehicles become ubiquitous? Now, the state's response at the moment seems to be inadequate to the task. We can get a $2,500 break toward the purchase of electric vehicles, a tax credit. The feds, depending on the brand, might supply or might not another $7,500, $10,000 defraying the cost of a $48,000 car doesn't make an electric vehicle affordable for most people in this town, in this audience listening tonight, and certainly throughout Massachusetts. So immediately there's an affordability issue, but there's more than that. There's range anxiety. We've read about that. We need electric chargers to be so commonplace that if you take a long trip up to Maine, or for that matter, a road trip across the United States, you can be confident that you're not going to run out of electricity, run out of a charge at a place where you can't recharge. So the infrastructure problem becomes enormous. But in the end, it's also a matter of making you comfortable or your neighbors comfortable, members of your extended family comfortable with that electric vehicle purchase. The first step we need is to make sure that everybody is enlisted in pursuing these three simple tasks: greening the grid, greening transportation, greening buildings. And in the climate bill that the legislature just passed, I regret to say that one thing I noticed as I was cobbling together the bill, listening to other legislators, actually listening to a lot of people on this call, because the expertise is local, is that the state's institutions, even the ones you normally associate with energy policy, weren't really ready to help out. Climate, in some ways, has been building, as we all know, since the beginning of the industrial age. And it's been an issue on the public agenda for really since the 1970s. It was in the late 70s that Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House. And yet, despite that lead time, in truth, state agencies like the Department of Public Utilities, which regulates natural gas and electric rates, like the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, the most important energy agency you've never heard of, which regulates the building codes, because remember, heating systems in the basement are key. Mass Save, a brand that we know, these are the folks who come into your house to conduct energy audits. Mass Save, the Department of Public Utilities, the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, none of them were really bought into the idea that climate is a central issue. They were all pursuing missions adjacent to the climate question, but always a little off point, in fact. So because all hands need to be on deck, a fundamental focus of the Climate Act was to make sure that, the Department of Public Utilities, the regulator of your electric and natural gas rates, had a new mission statement. For the first time, one that required it to focus on emissions reductions. The DPU is concerned, and it ought to be, with reliability and price, but it had never been told by the legislature and had never thought itself to make sure that reducing emissions was co-equal with those other two objectives, affordability and reliability. In the same way, Mass Save goes into your house, and it's been focused not so much on reducing pollution, but first of all, saving you money, and at the same time, upgrading your system, putting in insulation, replacing your light bulbs, beguiling you or enticing you, we hope, to replacing a heating system. But it was fine with Mass Save, always has been, if your old oil system was upgraded to a new oil system, which doesn't help the planet that much. Your old natural gas system, it was fine with Mass Save, it still is today at the moment, that we upgrade from the old natural gas system to a new natural gas system, which perpetuates the problem, puts into place a new product with a useful life of 20 years, 25 years. So Mass Save was into energy efficiency, and somehow that wasn't the same as reducing emissions and fighting the climate issue. We've reoriented Mass Save in the Climate Act. We have reoriented the Department of Public Utilities. We have completely remade this low-profile Board of Building Regulations and Standards that has a lot to do with the houses that you're going to be buying in the future here in Massachusetts. We've reoriented them, but just to bring this discussion back to the present, you asked me what's next. We've got all our ducks in a row. We've mustered some important resources. We've recognized our weaknesses. The question now is execution. How do we persuade you or your neighbor the next time the oil system gives out in the basement? How do we make sure that a heat pump is top of mind so that you feel comfortable ordering it up? And how do we make it affordable to you if the upfront costs are more than you can handle? Same way with electric cars. In the city, we need to make sure that green buses, green T buses, roll through urban neighborhoods so that if I can't afford a car at all, I have an emissions fighting option available to me in the form of a zero emission vehicle bus. And with respect to electric power, we all know that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So how do we build up our storage capacity so that we can discharge energy even when our green sources aren't necessarily generating it? These are all questions that the Climate Act gets to, but an action plan for all of us in the end reminds us that all politics is truly local. Because so much of this is greening your block and greening your neighborhood, and again, enabling people to be able to afford to green your neighborhood, all the stuff, what President Biden talks about, what Senator Markey talks about, what state senators or state representatives talk about, all of it comes down to, can we execute in Lexington, but can we execute in a useful and usable way that people feel good about in Chelsea, in Lawrence, in all the communities in between Lexington and Lawrence? This is all a local challenge, and it's that's what I look forward to working on with all of you. And we're going to be hearing in a moment from Mark Sandeen. Mark, to me, represents exactly the person who's going to be a change agent where the rubber hits the road, right? Mark has been, as Ricky mentioned, a leader locally where all this really has to happen. Everything else is preparation, local government and local activists, that's execution. And all of us have got to be about the business, of executing. That's where I'm putting all of my emphasis and all of my time. How can I make sure that my neighbors, I look up and down my own street here, how can I make sure that they feel good about the green alternative and can afford to bring it into their lives? With that, I'm going to close and yield the floor to Mark. And I look forward to pursuing this question of how we localize climate action, how we execute so that all this stuff, regardless of what level of government in which we engage with regard to it, all of this stuff becomes real and works for us. Mark?
Well, thank you so much, Senator. And you're going to hear those same themes from me as well. I have a couple slides that I might like to show and just talk a little bit about this. But I just want to say before we start that working with Senator Barrett has been an honor, and he is pushing the envelope on so many fronts, and I really appreciate the ability to work together with him on these things. In fact, what I'll be talking about today is just about everything that we've accomplished in Lexington has been accomplished because of the support at the state level. So before I start speaking, I should say that I am a select board member in the town of Lexington, but tonight I am speaking as an individual, and these opinions are mine. So let's just go through a little bit of the history of what Lexington's been doing over the last 10 years or so. We were one of the first 5 green communities. We adopted the Stretch Energy Code unanimously. And as Ricky said, in 2013, we adopted in town meeting a warrant article that said we will consider climate change in all appropriate decisions. Senator Barrett attended with us a public hearing on natural gas leaks, and we started a community choice program where we're delivering 100% renewables to all members of the community choice program. In 2018, the select board adopted a sustainable action plan and a net zero, getting to net zero plan, and the following year, an integrated building design policy in order to show some leadership in those initiatives. And the result of that integrated building design policy is we have our first net zero schools. Well, they will be net zero as soon as the solar is interconnected. And Senator Barrett attended in 2019 an event at the Lexington High School where the high school students set things up to declare a climate emergency in 2019. So we put together the Sustainable Action Plan. The Sustainable Action Plan is
Select Board Member, sorry, Mark, Select Board Member Mark, your slides are very small. So if you could adjust the, and I didn't, because you have a lot of great information there and it's really dense.
Is that better?
Oh, better, thank you.
Okay, I just need to switch. Okay. So so we created all right, now my mouse is in the wrong place. Okay, got it. So we created a sustainable action plan, which is in fact a superset of a climate action plan, because we're focused not only on climate, but also on health. And the object of the sustainable action plan is that we have a long-term goal of no emissions, but also to reduce our exposure to toxics and hazardous substances. And the adaptation part of the plan is that we want to be able to develop the infrastructure that's needed to address the future challenges that we need to provide essential services for all of our residents for, say, 3 weeks following some of these extreme storms and events. And when you look at emissions, this is a picture of where Lexington's emissions come from. And what you're looking at here on this slide is that about 66% of our emissions go into our buildings, 36% in the form of electricity, and about 30% in the form of natural gas and oil. 22% of our emissions are transportation. And as Senator Barrett said, when you solve buildings and transportation, you solve most of the issues. The remaining is waste and food and the 2% there. A lot of people think, when you think as a select board member, that we should be focusing on the municipal buildings and stuff. That's only about 2% of the total emissions in the town of Lexington. Okay, so, all right. So when we look at our vulnerabilities, we obviously have vulnerabilities from extreme storms, and those cause power outages and flooding. And when you flood something, you release toxics. In the event of hot heat waves and cold snaps, when we're out of power, we're going to need shelter, we're going to need food, we're going to need water and medicine, and we're going to need to design our infrastructure in order to adapt to this changing world. Not exactly sure why my slides don't move forward or backwards here. Okay. All right, there we go. And the Sustainable Action Plan is the overarching plan. The Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan is the part of the plan that's focused on buildings. And there are a number of different programs that we put in place in order to be able to accomplish these goals, like taking advantage of the state-run community choice program, the state-run commercial PACE program, and we need to have some other programs as well. So the Getting to Net Zero Emissions Plan, in 2018, the Select Board adopted a 25-year goal to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from all of Lexington's residential, commercial, and municipal buildings, and to achieve a complete transition to renewable energy sources. And there's really only 4 ways to do this. There's only really 4 steps to go on this path. As Senator Barrett said, a lot of this effort is really quite complex, but it can be boiled down to just 4 simple things. Report. The first thing we need to know is, what is our building's current performance and what is their performance going to be over time? We're going to need to reduce the energy the emissions that are coming from our buildings. And that means really only 2 things. We either need to reduce the amount of energy we're using energy efficiency, or we need to switch to cleaner fuels, as Senator Barrett said, from oil or natural gas to electric. The third thing is produce. We need to produce as much energy on site as possible from renewable energy, but that won't do it for all of our buildings. And so that means we're going to need to purchase renewable electricity to make up the remainder.
Mr. Sandeen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your slides aren't forwarding again, or are now not forwarding.
They're not forwarding, they're forwarding here.
We're seeing our greatest vulnerabilities.
Huh. I don't know what to say. I am seeing them forwarding.
Why don't you try to unshare and share again? Sometimes that fixes it.
Okay. Okay, do you see a slide?
They are, but they're small.
Now we're back to that again, huh? Does that make it large?
It does. Report, reduce, produce.
Okay, so I said, so now we're on community choice. Do you see
Yes.
that? Okay, so our community choice program, we have over 10,000 customers that are getting 100% renewable electricity right now, and that has resulted in $2 to $3 million of savings for our residents since the inception of the program. And it's delivering about 75% of the residential electricity in the town of Lexington and 17% of the commercial electricity in the town of Lexington. The community choice program is taken off statewide. When we started on our community choice program, there was about 12 communities. Now there's about 154 with active programs. And I should mention, there are, the little note there is that there's 16 to 20, depending on who you talk to, municipalities that have their community choice aggregation right now waiting in review at the Department of Public Utilities, including, I think, Weston, which is in the senator's territory. But right now, these 154 municipalities are about 53% of Massachusetts population lives in those municipalities, and it's delivering about 42% of the residential electricity and 9% of the commercial electricity in those communities. But the interesting part, not all of the community choice programs are delivering cleaner energy like Lexington's is. Only 49 of these 154 are delivering cleaner electricity. So back to our getting to net zero emissions plan. This is our waterfall chart of how we get to zero emissions. And the interesting thing is up on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a significant amount of emissions that we have from natural gas leaks. But the biggest ability for us to reduce our emissions to zero is, as Senator Barrett said, greening the grid and switching all of our electricity customers in Lexington to zero emission electricity. After that, we want to be seeing that we're fuel switching from oil and natural gas to electricity. And in order to enable that affordably, we're going to be need to engaging in energy efficiency retrofits. And finally, as Senator Barrett has put a tremendous amount of energy into developing a net zero stretch energy code so that when people are building new buildings, that those buildings are built to appropriate standards. And now it's not moving again. Okay. There we go. Did that move for you?
We're still on the getting to net zero chart.
Oh boy. I don't know why it keeps sticking here. We'll try one more time. Is that big or small?
It looks beautiful. Energy use shifts to electricity.
Okay, so the energy use, so the basic idea is as we eliminate fuel and natural gas, we're going to be increasing the amount of electricity we use on the grid, but the overall energy use will be declining. And now it won't move forward at all. Are you seeing this thing moving forward?
Oh, that's a beautiful chart.
Okay,
Yep.
So what you're looking at here, this is Massachusetts' overall energy consumption. And what you'll see, this big gray chart at the top says rejected energy. What that really means is wasted energy. And what you're seeing and looking at here is that the electricity that we generate in Massachusetts, it's same for across the country. 66% of all the energy we put into energy generation goes up the cooling stacks as waste heat, and only 1/3 is delivered to our buildings. And when you look at the bottom part of the chart and you look at the petroleum in green, you'll see a massive amount of oil is going into our transportation systems, but 79% of that energy is turned into heat that just goes out our tailpipes or into the air. So we have a massive amount of savings that we can make, not only in terms of dollars, but in terms of emissions by moving to renewable electricity on our grid so that we're making the appropriate amount of electricity and we're turning our electric vehicles to significantly higher efficiency. And what you're looking at in this chart now, you're looking at where all of the emissions come from in Massachusetts. And what you're seeing is that predominantly the emissions in Massachusetts are coming from two sources, natural gas and oil. And what you're looking at here is that about 50-50 split between residential, commercial, and industrial buildings and our transportation system. So in Lexington, we were confronted with having to do a lot of new school buildings. And back about 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we were in the process of designing the Estabrook School. And at that time, the select board asked that we might consider higher design standards for all electric, healthy buildings with higher indoor air quality, on-site renewable energy, exceptional resilience, and better cognitive performance. And with a goal, as Senator Barrett said, we want to do this economically with a lower total life cycle cost ownership than what we had been doing with conventional buildings. In 2019, the select board and the school committee adopted that integrated building design policy. And what the result is that we have now built a Hastings school. It's a 110,000 square foot school with 645 students in it, that once the solar panels in the parking lot are interconnected with the school, hopefully in the next month or so, this school will be a net zero school, generating all the electricity that it needs in order to operate over the course of a year. But more importantly, our integrated design and building policy said that we wanted to do this in a way that health is the #1 priority for all of our buildings in Lexington. And so what you will see is that this building has exceptional indoor air quality. It filters the air that's coming in from particulate matter. It provides great ventilation so that the students have good cognitive performance while they're in their schools. So, and delivered this all at lower total life cycle costs than a conventional building. So Senator Barrett talked at a very high level about this Senate Bill number 9 that they've put in place. And it is a fabulous bill that talks about how do we get to net zero over the next 30 years. And a lot of people get overwhelmed with the idea of we need to eliminate all of our energy and our emissions. And they look at this in a 2050 time, it sounds like a long way away. So one of the things that we've been doing here in Lexington is translating these longer term, higher level goals of how do we get to cut all emissions by 2050 to what do we do next year? And one of the things that we're looking at doing is we have about 500 boilers every year that are retired just from wearing out. So if we can reframe our emissions goals in terms of very visible, finite, positive, and immediate goals, like what we're going to need to do to cut all emissions is we're going to need to swap 500 boilers a year. And so I would like to make a suggestion to Senator Barrett that, going back to our first bullet in the Getting to Net Zero Emissions plan said report. One of the things that we've looked at in our analysis of Lexington is we've determined that our large buildings are responsible for about 66% of all of our electricity use and 50% of our natural gas use. And when you look at that, that's 116 buildings we have that are over 25,000 square feet. It turns out there's a handful of property owners that are responsible for 50% of all that space, and only 50 property owners that are responsible for 90% of that space. So if we could get a building energy reporting system in place, we might be able to model these larger buildings and make some decisions on them. And on the bottom of this chart, you're looking at some modeling that we've done for our own municipal buildings here in Lexington. And you can see the energy use intensity for gas and electricity on the left-hand side and our overall emissions on the right-hand side. And we just built a new fire station in Lexington that's an all-electric fire station except for the gas stove and the showers for the firemen. And what you're going to see there is that it has the lowest emissions intensity of any building in Lexington. Also, as a suggestion for the senator, he has got a great bill that he's supporting to get some transportation energy reporting to local municipalities. We've been tracking this over time. The More EV program previously used to provide data to the towns on what types of vehicles were being purchased under the program, and we were using that to track our progress along the way. But when the funding on the More EV program lapsed and they changed things, that reporting is no longer consistent with what it used to be. Back in 2012, an MIT student did this project as part of a senior thesis where he took a look at the entire 2012 RMV database and across the entire Massachusetts, and was able to provide data of every vehicle registered in the town by make and model, how many miles they were driven. And we have used that data in order to develop our information, but now we only have this one point of data. It would be wonderful if the state could provide local municipalities with vehicle data so that we knew how many miles and how many vehicles and what amount of fuel is being consumed in our fleet, so that we could have some plan for how to move forward. Now let's move back to our building. Senator Barrett said we want to be doing things about building our buildings right from the start. And town meeting has passed a clean heat warrant article last year by 175 to 7 with 96% approval. The idea being that we would want all new construction to be built with heat pumps. And the idea is that they're healthy, they're comfortable, they're affordable, especially when you're doing it at the beginning, when you're designing a brand new building. And the end result is you're going to have better air quality, lower cost. And in Lexington, as the senator is well aware, there's a lot of new construction going on. And what we expect to see is probably 1 million square feet of new construction over the next 2 years, just in the residential area. That clean heat warrant article requires legislative approval to take effect. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of why we want to do that. When you look at the amount of emissions that you have from each BTU or each unit of energy that's delivered, each unit of heat that's delivered to the house, the highest emissions that you're going to see are from natural gas today, with the amount of gas leaks that we have. And even if we're able to reduce all of our gas leaks to zero over time, what you're going to see is that natural gas is still substantially higher than the amount of emissions that you'd get from air source heat pumps. And as we move the grid to greener and greener, we eventually get to a situation where you're able to run your heat pumps on and produce zero emissions. And for people who are using 100% renewable electricity right now, whether that's from solar on their roof or purchasing it through a community choice program, those people are zero emissions today. And to Senator Barrett's point, you need to do this affordably. And what you're looking at is here is that an air source heat pump is going to cost less to heat your home than propane furnaces or propane boilers, and approximately the same as it costs to heat with a gas furnace or a gas boiler. Okay, we got stuck again here. Did this switch to RMI?
Yep.
Okay, so this shows a report from Rocky Mountain Institute that shows that the total life cycle cost for new buildings is substantially lower if you start with heat pumps. And one of the main reasons for that is that when you're doing a new building, you can put in, instead of a boiler and an air conditioner, you can put in a heat pump, and that provides both the heating and the cooling. So Senator Barrett has also provided tremendous amount of help for us in Senate Bill 9. One of the things a lot of people ask is, if we're moving to an all-electric world, how do we get to a resilient world from an electricity perspective? And Eversource, based on the changes that have been made in Senate Bill 9, has the authority to build microgrids. And one of the things that they've proposed is that they would build a microgrid in Lexington centered around the fire station that would provide essential services like grocery stores, emergency medical facilities, gas stations, grocery stores, pharmacies, gas stations, with power in the event of an extended outage. And the idea that they have is that they would build solar panels in the parking lots and back those up with energy storage. We think that's a wonderful idea, that we might be able to provide that type of resilience in the event of a 1 week or a 2 week or a 3 week outage. And now that we're watching what's happening in New Orleans, this kind of thing happens more and more frequently. Senator Barrett's also put into the Senate Bill 9 something to support doing pilots for a new idea called geo-microdistricts. And I really applaud the senator for giving us some ability to test out whether these ideas will work. But the basic idea of a geo-microdistrict is that the gas utility could move from being a gas utility to being a thermal provider by drilling water wells throughout a whole neighborhood and then linking all the houses and businesses in that neighborhood together to share heat back and forth. And it also provides some storage of heat through the seasons. So we're not sure how this will work out, but the initial indications are that this is a tremendous way to move forward. So you could have microgrids in order to have highly resilient electric power, and you could have micro districts in order to provide highly resilient thermal power. The senator is very, I agree completely with the senator about the importance of transforming our DPU, our BBRS, our mass save, our utilities. Right now, our utility profits are based on asset ownership. And the idea there is that the energy demand, as we use more and more energy, that drives the investment in new assets. So the utilities appreciate that. In Mass Save, we established a program in 2008, but this program has been successful because we aligned the utility interest with state efficiency goals. And the result has been that Massachusetts has been a leader in energy efficiency for the last decade. And as the senator said, and I really applaud him for this, this Mass Save program has been an excellent program for 12 or 13 or 14 years, but it's now time to start shifting the focus to electrifying everything from replacing light bulbs and provide incentives for heat pumps. And this is, again, a personal opinion of mine. No one should ever buy another air conditioner. Basically, a heat pump is an air conditioner that can go in forward and reverse. Let me ask you a question. Would you buy a car that couldn't go in reverse? That's basically what we're talking about here. If you're getting to the point of needing a new air conditioner, you should be buying a heat pump because now you'll have a car that can go back and forth. Or would you buy a car that could only operate in the summer months as opposed to a car that could operate year round? So I applaud the senator for his efforts in this area. Anybody who knows me knows I cared a great deal about solar. One of the things I would think about is maybe we could consider aligning utility interest with the state goals on utility energy. As you see, we had a tremendous uptake in solar for many years, 2009 through 2017, but that slowed down over the last 2 or 3 years. And this is the latest data that's available for Mass DOER right now is 2019 data. Another way that we might consider accelerating solar power is to allow homeowners to install enough solar on their roofs or in their homes in order to power their electric vehicles and their heat pumps. As the senator said, if we're going to move everybody to electric vehicles and heat pumps, we're going to need to have a way to provide that power. What better way than to do that on the roof? And I propose that we do that with a simple incentive program based on Class 1 RECs that are sold at market rate. And as the senator said 3 or 4 times in his presentation, we should allow those energy storage systems that are coupled with that to net meter. So that bill, there's a bill that does all 3 of these things. It's called Senate 2169. The senator has been a tremendous supporter with us in terms of this issue I brought up 2 or 3 times about fixing gas leaks. We have got a $20 billion program. It's a 20 or 30 year program that's been going on now for 5 or 6 years. To replace 30% of the leak-prone pipes in our network. We still have a lot of direction to go. There's 14,000 gas leaks in Massachusetts, 150 something in Lexington. And as the senator said, we're going to need to switch to electric vehicles, and that means cars and buses, as the senator said, but it also means e-bikes. That is a big way that we can sort of do this more efficiently and not have as much traffic. The town of Lexington has put a tremendous amount of energy into making the Lexington a walkable, a bikeable town. That we have across Lexington trails where you can walk anywhere from across the town into the center and around. We've got the Minuteman Bikeway, and the select board has recently approved lowering the speed limit in the center to 20 miles an hour. Public transit, we have a local regional express, and Rep. Michelle Shikola and Senator Barrett and Senator Cindy Friedman are all supporting at the state level implementing transit improvement districts that would allow us to get transportation to the businesses in town. And I would encourage the senator, as he's thinking about how we move forward with all these vehicles, that we start thinking about using these vehicles as emergency backup. Many people saw the Ford 150 Lightning announcement that said that the Ford 150 can power their home for up to 3 days. It would be awfully nice if it could also stabilize the grid. I also would thank the senator. When the More EV program ran out of money a while back, the senator was instrumental in ensuring that it was recharged, so to speak. And now not only is providing incentives for cars, but for trucks as well. So what you're looking at here is the tiers of the More EV program that provide incentives starting at $7,500 and up to $90,000 for smaller lightweight trucks all the way up to fire engines and dump trucks. So finally, I would say there are tremendous, we talked a lot about climate here, but every one of the things that we do for climate has a health benefit. When we eliminate particulate matter, air pollution from heating with oil, from diesel and gas vehicles, from gas-powered lawn equipment, and from cooking with gas, it improves our health. With Cindy asking questions, I can't not end with waste and recycling and composting. She has been a leader in this area with many of the people on this call, but one of the things we really need to do, it just can't happen at the local level. We're going to need to establish producer responsibility laws in terms of the people who are producing our plastics, in terms of increasing the bottle bill fee, which I think has been in the same rate for 30 years, something along that lines. And at the local level, we are starting to implement town-wide curbside composting pickup. And I'd love to see incineration standards so we think about justice when we're sending our trash away, because there is no way when our trash is burned in somebody else's neighborhood, they get to breathe our trash. So finally, the climate crisis is nonlinear. The amount of effort we're going to have to do in a short period of time is difficult, but so are the solutions. The solutions we're seeing nonlinear solutions right now, where solar and wind power are lower cost than putting new power plants up for gas and nuclear and coal and oil. So finally, the solutions to climate crisis, they make everything else better: our physical health, our mental health, our clean air, our clean water, justice and equity, safety, resilience, economics, biodiversity. And we are only going to be able to do that by working together. University of Colorado research recently suggested that it is the social norms, the unwritten rules of community conduct that matter more than the rebates and incentives in terms of finding solutions to difficult problems, and that it is neighborliness and social cohesion and family relationships that are just as important as economic policy for solving these problems. So finally, the only answer is working together, and neighbors and your neighbors who know and care about each other will make all the difference in this crisis. And I just want to end by quoting our local superintendent of schools, Dr. Julie Hackett, who said on Twitter, of course, a couple of weeks ago, in the happiness equation, two things matter: strong relationships and a sense of purpose. And I really appreciate working with Senator Barrett on this and with everybody on this call. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Select Board Member Sandeen and Senator Barrett, for your words earlier. Senator Barrett, you sort of laid out really simple. It's great. You know, you talk about the essentials, the 1, 2, 3, greening the grid, electrifying our buildings, electrifying our cars. And I really am glad that you mentioned that this is a job for everybody. You know, we have to ask our local municipal leaders to do something. We have to ask our state leaders to do something. We have to ask our federal leaders to do something, and that's really, really important in order to get meaningful results in the timeline that we need. Select Board Member Sandeen, you are always, always so great with so much great information and graphs, and I think from what I can see in the chat, people were really, really engaged with that. There's some questions about you sharing, being willing to share those slides, so he's nodding yes. I want to thank you really quick to LexCAN. I'm honored that you're letting me ask questions to our senator and our select board member. But because I'm doing it, I get to ask the first question. There's a lot of questions in the chat, which are really great. But I'm going to ask my question first. I'd like you to both give your ideas about you know, all the people that are here tonight are really concerned about what's going on and they want change to happen. How important is it for these people in our community? And Mark, Mr. Sandeen, you talked about people who, you know, we got to talk to our community to let their municipal and state leaders know how important this is and how we need them to take action now. And what advice would you have for individuals that feel sort of nervous about speaking up?
You know, you're appealing to Mark and me, and as we wear our political hats, we are both politicians. I will confess to being more of one than I believe Mark is. Great presentation, by the way, magisterial, really. I can tell you, I can talk about Massachusetts politics, and I will say that the politicians I know, Cindy, are actually hyper reactive to individual conversation and the individual approaches. You might think it's the opposite, that there's an ivory tower effect or a power broker effect, and that we love to gather in closed rooms. First of all, nobody's gathering in the State House these days. We've abolished, the pandemic has sent the closed room into hiding, and we're out walking the dog, we're out talking to constituents, we're out running errands, we're engaged during the day and chatting with a lot of people. It really makes an impression on me when I sense that the quotient of interest in climate is still climbing, that the level of concern has scarcely peaked. And I use common sense indicia of this like we all do. If everybody with whom I walk my dog every day is engaged in climate and is worried about it, about this crazy weather, that makes a gut impression on me. I go home worried a bit myself and very motivated to try to do my job. So if you have a chance to, and I'll tell you, I read my mail. It all comes in electronically these days. So reading my mail for the most part means simply sticking to my various email accounts, personal and State House. I look at every one, and lobbying works. It may not work in every jurisdiction, and it may not work when the official is really highly placed, although even there, I think people are, again, politicians are hyper reactive in a sense. But at the state legislative level, we're not very far removed from our neighbors. We see them every day. We get home every night. And so I absorb a lot, and people should have a lot of confidence that when they communicate to a state legislator or to a member of Congress, that those politicians are absorbing the message more than you might think. I will say in Massachusetts, and it may not be true in a larger jurisdiction, but this is kind of a small state in a lot of ways, a relatively compact community, that money does not interfere with the communications process as much as you might think. I like to think, for example, that even though there are only 40 state senators in Massachusetts, this is an office where because you don't need to go on TV and because you don't need to go on radio,
anyone almost can run an affordable campaign for state representative or state senate. It starts to be very expensive after that because members of Congress cover an enormous geographic territory and must speak to lots of people simultaneously. But at the state level, where a lot of this energy stuff is going to get worked out, and at the local level, I hear you. You can find me. I'm not very immune to the same fears that everybody else has. I'm hit with them every day, just as a dad and as a spouse and as a neighbor. People should have a lot of confidence that political communication works. And remember, all of us, including me, I can run for office or rerun for office without big bucks and without contributions from the special interests. And I, for example, don't take any money from PACs. It's a personal preference of mine. I take no money from lobbyists. I mean, none. All my contributions, and I'm not asking for any, I've got enough, thank goodness. All my contributions are local or from within the state, which only enables me, I hope, to reinforce my main point, which is that we're accessible and there aren't a lot of intervening interests. There are some. I don't want to belittle the threats that come from large corporate interests prowling the state house with cadres of lobbyists. Still, these forces can be overcome. Politics can work in Massachusetts. Push us hard on the climate issue and believe that your voice will be heard, because it will be.
Thank you very much, Senator. I don't know, Mr. Sandeen, if you had anything to add.
I'll take it from a little bit different perspective, from 15 years ago when I was just an individual trying to figure out what to do. And I look on my little Zoom screen here and I see a friend of mine who encouraged me 15 years ago to do a low carbon diet. And so we went together and we did a low carbon diet on our house. And then we got back together and we said, well, now what's going to happen? Nothing, right? We just did our little thing for our house, and what's going to happen? And what ended up happening is we started talking, had a conversation with 5 or 6 or 7 other people and said, how do we make a bigger difference? And those ideas resulted in the Stretch Energy Code campaign in Lexington. And so what ended up happening is that an individual felt powerless, but as a group felt powerful, and then able to make change at a bigger level, at a local level. The other thing I would say is that the very first thing I did when I felt powerless is I went to LexGWAC meetings where they taught me about what solar power was. I didn't know anything about solar power 15 years ago. And so that's how I would suggest Mothers Out Front, Sunrise Movement. There's so many different organizations, and I see many of them on this call. Every time you get involved with 2 or 3 other people, your impact goes up by a square or a cube or something. So thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions in here. So I'm going to combine a few of them. And this is probably more for Senator Barrett, but Mr. Sandeen, you can also interject if you have. But the Next Generation Bill, there's some questions about people are concerned that there might be, are there obstacles with a lack of heating and enough heating and cooling professionals to install these heat pumps? And sort of also with that, you mentioned Mass Save earlier and about the changes that they have to make. So what do you see, like how soon do you see that happening? So are there things in the Next Generation Bill, and how's it going to work with getting more heating and cooling professionals? And what's the sort of timeline on Mass Save taking the action you mentioned?
Mass Save is going to continue to be, I think, a little bit of a battleground, to be perfectly candid, but we're going to see immediate progress. The question still is whether we are going to see success. Progress in this sense. Mass Save works in 3-year increments, so there's a 3-year plan that's not yet finalized that has to be adopted, in fact, by January of 2022 for the 3 years 2022, 2023, and 2024. In the Climate Act, we took several steps. We took a look at the Mass Save effort and we said, look, you need to translate each of these 3-year plans, including the one coming up beginning in January of 2022, into emissions reductions. You're talking about energy savings, energy efficiency, but you don't translate this into the same currency with which we're measuring our progress in dealing with climate, and that is emissions reduced. So beginning in 2022, with the next 3-year plan, as a legal matter, the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs will set at the outset for you an emissions reductions goal. You're going to translate everything you do into this, again, the kind of measures we use, the units of measures we use when we figure out if we're making progress against this climate challenge. The Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs in July, 3 months ago, set a goal for the very first time in Massachusetts history for this upcoming 3-year plan. And then we say to the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which is a group that watchdogs Mass Save's efforts, we say, look, you too have to make sure that everything Mass Save does results not only in reductions in BTUs, but in reductions in emissions. And so you are now responsible in a way you weren't before, along with the secretary. And we say to the DPU, which has to approve these 3-year plans formally, we say, look, you're going to have to come back at the end of this 3-year effort and report on whether the secretary's goal set at the outset was achieved. What I saw 2 weeks ago, Cindy, was a consultant come in on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, the EEAC, and the consultant said this to the utilities who had put together this 3-year draft. You know what, folks? You are achieving only half of the emissions reductions that the Secretary of EEA is tasking you to achieve. What you've written so far doesn't get us to the objectives that the Secretary spelled out. Go back to the drawing board. That was the advisory committee hiring a consultant to read the 3-year plan, after which they realized that it wasn't up to achieving the objectives the Secretary has set. All of this happened because of provisions in the new Climate Act. So we're really drilling down and asking who's stepping up, who's doing their job, are they conceiving of it correctly, and who can provide an oversight function to make sure that things get done. And by the way, I am joined here in Lexington, but this is true across the entire state of Massachusetts too, by a terrific group of legislators. Cindy Friedman, who represents more than half of this town, and State Representative Michelle Ciccolo are fantastic on climate questions. And I could say the same thing about the state reps and the state Senate, almost for all of Greater Boston. We've got a tremendous group of motivated people, but I will say, candidly, that the state institutions and the executive, weren't really all focused on the climate issue. I mentioned that in my opening statement. I think we've got a very good shot now at reorienting them and making sure that we're all pulling in the same direction. But to Mark's point, and I thought his presentation was brilliant, this is a matter of details. This is a matter of drilling down and getting very serious about each player. And I think the Climate Act puts us on the right course in that respect.
Thank you. Mr. Sandeen? Yeah, he did a great job of that. I wanted to I'm going to jump around a bit. There was a lot of questions, Mr. Sandeen, you talked about microgrids, which were very exciting, putting solar panels over parking lots. There were some questions about that, but we have questions about solar panels over parking lots, solar panels, as carports, and even like more reflective surfaces. So anywhere where you're not going to put a solar panel, should you make them more reflective to sort of reduce the heat island effect? How can we get that sort of stuff done? What do we need to do?
How do we get solar done?
How do we just keep talking about it, right? But what are other things that we can do? How should we be pushing for this?
Well, one of the things a lot of people think about when they think about solar is they think about their rooftops. And one of the things we discovered in our Hastings school design is that people said it would be impossible for this to be a net zero school because there just isn't enough room on the rooftop. And what we said was, well, we do have parking lots. And it turns out at the end of the day that roughly 2/3 of all the electricity that we generate for the Hastings School are coming from the parking lots. And so when we went out to bid again to do another round, our third round of solar for the town, a number of the schools had already put solar on the rooftops, but hadn't put it in their parking lots. So our first round of solar at our schools in 2014 was 1.1 megawatts on our rooftops. And then we did 2.2 megawatts out on the composting facility. And then this latest round, just putting solar in our parking lots at our schools is 2.6 megawatts. So substantially larger than either one of those things. So I would suggest that parking lots are a great resource. And for those people who are concerned about trees and the viability of our forests in Western Massachusetts, it makes a lot of sense to think about how do we move our solar closer to load and where we are here. So we don't need to be cutting down forests in Western Massachusetts in order to provide electricity here in Lexington.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of people that have some questions about how you feel, Senator Barrett, and Select Board Member Sandeen, about a communication plan to do more education and raise awareness, not just with residents, but even I have a feeling that there's a number of people from different towns, not Lexington, even though we're here, LexCAN is sponsoring this, that they feel like they need help with their municipal officials in sort of coming up to speed and sort of understanding the urgency. So
it is a problem. We have a tradition here of home rule in Massachusetts. Communities very proudly lead the way. They don't want to see the state or the feds usurp too much power. And the only way that works is constant grassroots pressure, because what I've seen with respect to buildings, and Mark can confirm this, right now we do have, he alluded to it and so did I, a stretch energy code in place circa 2010. It was a first generation attempt to make buildings more energy tight. We've just required the Department of Energy Resources, an important state energy agency, to draft a second generation, a next generation building code. But it's going to be local opt-in. And when I look back at the data with respect to the 2010 stretch code, the first generation, I see that about 100 of Massachusetts' 351 cities and towns have never adopted it. When we move to the next generation stretch code, which is really going to aim for net zero new construction and substantial rehabilitation, we're going to be looking at a 3-tiered system. There will still be communities that didn't move to tier 1 circa 2010. A number of communities will remain in that first gen and won't transit up to the stretch energy code we're now drafting. So you'll have pre-2010, first generation stretch code, next generation stretch code. The state will tier out. So grassroots pressure on your local officials is critical. If we're going to create local opt-in and give you the opportunity to be in the vanguard, really in the end, there is no substitute for local politicking. You've got to elect the right folks to your select board, to the planning board, to the school committee. You've got to constantly be engaged. There is no shortcut to making democracy work. And that is, I don't mean to sound trite, to my mind, and I suspect to the minds of a lot of people here, the question of whether democracy works and works well is a life or death question. And events on the national level have called it into question recently. So this is something where there are no free riders. All of us have got to enlist in this cause as activists or working for candidates we like, if we're not going to be candidates ourselves. And it is a lifetime gig. It lasts even longer than your professional work life. But to be responsive to the question you summarized, I don't have a shortcut if your local official is being unresponsive, except to redouble your efforts and find other candidates who can do the job. In Massachusetts, I wouldn't say this is true in every state in the union. There's some for which I harbor more modest hopes, but in Massachusetts, we can think and we can reasonably aspire to grassroots politics, carrying the day and keeping us focused on important issues, not of health disparities and of wealth disparities and of climate.
Thank you. And I know you go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just reinforce the senator's comment that we were in the select board meeting last night, and I can tell you that on one of the issues we talked about, one letter from one constituent changed how the select board felt about a particular situation. So this is very possible. I'm also reminded of this wonderful story Bill McKibben used to tell about he was having trouble getting his local official in Vermont to do something. And he wrote and talked and whatever. And he said, the constant answer was, we need more data. I need to study this more. I need more data, I need to study this more. So he got 300 people together and walked to the State House, and the person came down and met him and said, we'll do this. It turned out all the studying that was necessary was that there were 300 people who wanted to get this thing done.
Yeah, thank you. And Senator Barrett, you mentioned earlier, you know, the great work that Lexington's other elected officials, state elected officials are doing, Senator Friedman and Rep. Sokolow. And I have to tell you guys, if you haven't noticed, Rep. Sokolow is on tonight. She's listening and she's helping to answer questions because there's so many questions in the chat. So thank you,
Michelle.
Thank you, Rep. Sokolow. I wanted to, I asked about this a little bit before, and I'm going to try to, again, because there's so many great questions, put them together. But this need and you know, the next, Mr. Sandeen, you said something like, you know, however many houses are, you know, that we're going to have to convert per year. What are we doing about sort of building up that workforce that we're going to need to sort of be working on all of these existing buildings that we're having? We're doing some great work with new construction, right? But we've got all these existing buildings. And I have to say that someone sort of likened it to, well, you know how we have, you know, mileage goals for vehicles, although our mileage goals for vehicles, even for electric vehicles, we want them to be able to go very far. What about having sort of some standards too for these contractors and installers, that they should be held to a standard? You know, the systems that they're installing should be more and more efficient and should be less and less you know, emitting and more, you know, have less emissions. So if you can both you know, speak to that sort of the workforce installers that we need.
Let me just say, I think Mark can speak in a granular way. To be blunt about it, we need to be pro-immigration. We don't have enough young people in Massachusetts. We are one of the older states, but as we know, the entire country, actually the entire world, is graying. We had an explosion of births worldwide after the last Great War, World War II. We've had an echo boom or two, but the aging of the Massachusetts population and of the national and international, it's a huge problem in China, where they've had a one-child policy that is now coming back to haunt them. This is a worldwide issue, so we've got to be an open and welcoming state. We will have more work than workers, I think, for the rest of my lifetime. That's good for my kids, but it's a real challenge for me as a policymaker. The problem here is not going to be, in the end, a high unemployment rate. The problem here is going to be matching people to the jobs that need doing, of which there are so many. So to answer your question, I would supply all the usual expressions of hope, which is that we will fund our community colleges. We will probably, I think, in the next several years, make a 2-year community college education free. In part, that's just enlightened self-interest. We want to help kids avoid extraordinary debt, but we need skilled workers. So if you can become a mechanical engineer, and the mechanical engineer is the person who works with the HVAC personnel as these new buildings go up. If you can become a mechanical engineer, we're going to help pay for your education. If you don't want to go to a 2-year post-high school institution, if you want to start working immediately after high school, we will work with organized labor to create apprenticeship programs. There's a lot of training that happens right now. The problem, I think, but there is, I'm sorry, I don't want to ignore the fact that right now, the Mass Save person coming into your house is likely not to be oriented to talk about non-fossil fuel alternatives to your oil furnace or your gas furnace. He or she, without question, is going to be in the old school by and large. In part, that's because we haven't yet reoriented Mass Save. The incentives right now for the independent contractor, not employed by Mass Save. Mass Save is an umbrella, almost a marketing organization or set of organizations that reaches down into the ranks of the individual contractor in your community. He sends a fellow or a woman into your home to do the work. And so training is very difficult because we're not talking about a state employee workforce that can be told to show up for a seminar on Friday morning instead of reporting for work. This is going to have to be done through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, which does think about workforce training, but we're going to have to fund it, and we have infused an additional multi-millions dollars. We're going to have to use the ARPA money. We're all familiar with the money that's flowing down from Washington. The state legislature is appropriating $5 billion in ARPA money, which is economic recovery money voted by Congress and sponsored by President Biden. We're going to be appropriating $5 billion of that in the next 4 months, and workforce training is going to be critical, but we are going to quickly find, Cindy, that we simply lack for bodies. And so becoming a state where you can afford to live, and that's critical. So now we're far afield from climate. We're talking about the cost of housing, and we're talking about the cost of higher education too. We're going to have to make sure that all these pieces work, because in the end, Massachusetts needs to grow its population. And I will say there are reasons for hope, right? For several federal censuses, we've been losing population every 10 years. In the last federal census, the one that we just heard from, Massachusetts population popped up 7.4% from 2010 to 2020. That's the city of Boston, which has been hemorrhaging people, increased in population 9.4%. So people want to return to the city, and they want to return to the state because we have a good job base. All of this has to work together. My district includes some well-to-do suburbs, but it also includes a diverse place, the city of Waltham. 25% of Waltham's population is Latino. And Waltham's sweet spot, Waltham's word of mouth strength comes among would-be immigrants into this country from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. So I spend a lot of time as a state senator making sure that Waltham has resources augmented by the state to serve as a welcoming place for Latino immigrants. And I'm happy they're here, but again, it's selfish too. We need young, hardworking folks. And it happens that the labor participation rate of the Guatemalan population in Waltham is sky high. They are very hardworking people. They're the folks who tend the lawns in Lexington. They're folks who by and large can't afford to live here, but they work very long days. Their kids are going to wind up owning houses in Lexington. And for the moment, they're cutting our grass. We need to offer them training opportunities. We need to make sure that Massachusetts is a place where they can start a new life and have great aspirations for their kids.
So let me riff on something Senator Barrett talked about halfway through his answer, which is Mass CEC support. And I appreciate the senators getting sort of Mass CEC recharged, because let me tell you a little bit of a story here in Lexington. When people want to put heat pumps in, they call around and ask, who can I find that can give me some advice on how to do this? And our sustainability director, Stella Carr, found an outfit that provides this service, not from a heat pump installer company, not from a Mass Save company, but from a company that had energy building experts that would provide this as a service. And I sampled this service where a gentleman didn't come into my house, came into my house over Zoom, looked at my looked at my heating systems, my air conditioning systems, and gave me advice about the best way to navigate from one set to the other set, and then provided me with some contractors that could do this job. Now, they have just been hired by Mass CEC. I think one of the biggest things we're going to need to make the transition is to have trusted advisors that can give advice to residents that no, you don't want to go down this path, you do want to go down this path. And because a lot of people get frozen when they have two contractors who tell them different things, you want to go this way or that way, and having a trusted advisor that comes with an imprimatur of Mass CEC to give them some advice is going to accelerate our transition.
Thank you, Mr. Sandeen. I've got a couple of questions about, you had actually mentioned about the utilities, you know, about gas and this you know, potential move away from natural gas, but the gas, you know, utilities could have turned into maybe these not microgrids, but I forget the name of.
Geo-micro districts.
Geo-micro districts, yes. You know, in that sort of interest, like what, you know, what actions are necessary to get, you know, the utilities on the gas side to make that transition, and then on the electric side, you know, to give to act more in terms of individuals, you know, with battery storage, you know, electricity storage, or, you know, demand. You talked a little bit about it, Mr. Sandeen, about demand response, but you know, what can we do there with the utilities?
Well, I defer to the senator because he, to start off, because he's enabled the pilot programs, and so I'm sure he has a few words he'd like to say about that.
Well, Mark is right that these proposals for geo-micro districts are fascinating but realistic. I'm convinced that there's a real there. There's some beef there, in case people are asking where the beef. The new term, I think, is geo blocks. That's easier to remember. The idea is to take your house, which, as we all know, this is the foundational idea of heat pumps. Down below, in your yard, 6 feet down, the temperature stays the same year round. That's remarkable. Stays about 50 to 55 degrees, right, Mark? About 6 feet down. If you keep drilling beyond there, if you go down 200 feet, and I'm talking about a small 6-inch pipe, I'm talking about the equivalent really of a needle inserted into the earth. If you drill down 200 to 500 feet, you get a source of constant heat. That's the geothermal center of the planet Earth. So if the temperature stays the same year round, 6 feet down, and is actually very hot and throwing off available thermal energy 500 feet down, the question is, how can we enable you to tap that at a price, again, that you can afford? The answer in terms of the geo-block analysis is something like this. We're going to knit together a neighborhood. We're not going to ask you to do it by yourself in every case. We're going to provide some upfront funding. And the reason we're going to let the utilities play, and they shouldn't inherit a new monopoly for free and without competition. So this is a transitional possibility for the utilities, but we also want to supply competition to those utilities and let other folks bid, including municipal governments, right? This Wakefield, Massachusetts has a municipal gas plant. They don't rely on national grid for natural gas as Lexington does. So we could go to a place like Wakefield and say something like this: choose an entire neighborhood. Let's provide some seed capital from the state or from the feds. Let's let the utilities realize that they can transition to an alternative business that's going to make them money. The social contract here we're offering Eversource and National Grid goes something like this. Your natural gas business has to come way down. Your electric business can go way up, because remember, the world's experts agree that the solution really to the climate crisis is to green the grid and then use it to animate everything. So your electric power business goes way up, your natural gas business goes way down,
And we're also going to let you transition to being a provider, to tapping this energy either deep in the earth or 5 feet down, putting together a new piping infrastructure that links all houses on a street. And we're probably, and this is an interesting idea, rather than having to look for enormous sums of new money, we will let the utilities become hybrids. They will be in the old natural gas business, but they will also be in the new thermal energy business, the natural energy business. And we will transition and enable them to provide both services as long as we put them on a brisk march away from natural gas and towards geothermal. They've got to do this on a schedule set by the state. And by the way, that's feasible because alone among the corporations that exist in the United States, the most regulated economic sector are natural gas and electric utilities. If the state government were willing to use the legal authority that it's always had, we could make sure that these utilities were true public-private partnerships as responsive to us as to shareholders. So the possibility of knitting together with electric and natural gas funding, a kind of hybrid transition from natural gas to geothermal is real. And here's what I've proposed to the geo block people. I've proposed that they do it on a community-wide basis and that they look for early adopters. I think they should put out an RFP. I think municipals like Lexington or Wakefield or Somerville and Chelsea should be able to submit applications because you need that popular buy-in at the local level among consumers with a receptive community that was willing to really engage with this. I think we could provide a lot of, as I say, seed capital from the feds and the state, put the utilities to work devising a transition plan, which was written down on paper, publicized to the community, evolved over the course of years through public meetings and through consultations with local government. I believe that a Wakefield or a Lexington could be a proving ground. We'll get all the data we need by testing this out in jurisdictions that opt in and don't feel coerced to be a part of it otherwise. I'm actually very intrigued by it, and I happen to think, and I'm going to try to make this happen, although I will not be alone. I'm going to try to see if some of our ARPA money can't be tapped, or some of the federal infrastructure bill that's still in Congress, but is going to find, the money's going to find its way locally following the economic recovery money that's currently has arrived. I want to make sure that between ARPA, which is the money that's already here, and the Congress's infrastructure bill, which is the money that's coming next, and then you've got the Budget Reconciliation Act money, which is coming after that. This is the opportunity we need to fund geo blocks, geo micro districts on a community-wide scale and test it out one town at a time, because we'll learn a lot in the early going.
I'll say Lexington would love to be your test kitchen.
Good to know.
And at least I'm speaking for myself. But I see one of my friends on the call here is from Wellesley, and they have a swimming pool and a hockey rink right next to each other. And this is sort of the perfect model for one of these geo blocks, because the hockey rink is always taking heat off of the ice, and the swimming pool is always needing to put heat into the water constantly. And so what a geo micro block would do in this sort of situation is it would take the heat from that hockey rink and it would pump it into the swimming pool 100% of the time. So the efficiency goes up by factors here. And that same thing can happen when you're combining businesses with residents. So when you have a lab that's boiling lots of water and needs to get rid of lots of heat, you can run it into local neighborhoods. And so your efficiencies for an air source heat pump, you get 3 units of heat for every 1 unit of electricity you put in. For a ground source 5 or 6, you can get 10 or 15 when you're doing this sort of sharing. And the other sort of amazing thing that happens, Senator Barrett mentioned it a couple times, but I just want to sort of draw it out a little bit, is because you're storing thermal energy in the ground, you can do that seasonally. So the biggest problem of going to 100% renewable economy is to do that on a way that goes across seasons.
This is amazing stuff. You got, I mean, this is like the ideas that we're coming up with. But I think, you know, we are really going to have to, you know, talk about these kinds of ideas, and there's so many different ways that we can make a difference, and we've got to act on all of them. I want to be very, I've been given the heads up, like we were supposed to end at 8:30. It's 8:35 now, but so many great questions. I just, Senator and the Select Board Member Sandeen, I wanted to let you know that there are questions about, you know, bills in the state legislature. You know, what should be what's going to pass, and what should we be pushing for? Towns with municipal light plants are asking about how, you know, how do we get a piece of this green community stuff so we can get our communities moving forward. I'm going to
suggest, just send me the questions. I'd love to.
Awesome. I was going to, thank you. I was also going to suggest people that the senator, you know, I know you send out newsletters, you have a website, maybe you're going to, you know, put some of that stuff up on your website, and we can go check that out. I greatly appreciate that you're talking about our environmental justice communities. That we're thinking about that when we're thinking about how we move forward. It's really important. So many great questions, but, you know, questions about, well, carbon pricing didn't get into this next generation climate bill. Are we going to talk about carbon pricing? Senator, I'm going to let you, you know, talk about that in your communications. It's such great questions. I think we're just going to end there, and maybe, you know, Senator and Select Board Member Sandeen, if you have any final words you want to say, and we'll end it there.
Well, Cindy, first of all, I want to thank you. You have been synthesizing information at an impressively furious rate. I've seen those questions. I know how challenging it's been to summarize them for us. So thank you for a fantastic job moderating. I would say, with regard, I want to answer one of the questions you threw out to me, and that's what should we be asking next? And I think the thing to ask of the legislature next is do a new climate bill. We really need to take a run at this every 2 years. And I really need your help. This is not going to be an easy case to make necessarily with all my colleagues who are juggling so many priorities, from mental health to higher education to elementary and second to public health to criminal justice. So just persuading the legislature to take a crack at the next list of things that need doing is real work. The one message I would love you to direct to your legislator, anybody listening tonight, is you've done good work. Thank you for the climate bill, if you want to say that, but we need another climate act. I think you could say that we're going to need new legislation every session because there's so much to do. And that's in fact the way I feel about this. And I'm going to yield to my partner in crime, Mark Sandeen, and thank him for joining us tonight too. Loved your presentation.
Well, thank you. And I don't really have much more to add than that, other than what I said at the beginning. Nothing that we've been doing in Lexington would have been possible without the support from our state legislative delegation and from the state that has been putting these programs in place for many years. And what's next for Lexington is going to depend on these creative ideas that Senator Barrett's talking about right now.
That's great. So everybody, thank you so much for coming tonight. This has been recorded by Lex Media. Lex Media, thank you for that. So that will be available. And I will let perhaps Ricky let us know how, you know, some slides and maybe, you know, some further questions. I know Mark Sandeen offered to answer some questions that couldn't get answered tonight. So I'll let Ricky communicate that. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, so I'll just close out and thank everybody for coming tonight. what a wonderful event. Mark Sandeen and Mike Barrett, the senator, just a wealth of information for us to sift through. We will send you some questions that you might like to take a crack at. We will be sending out the video and Mark's slides and even the chat, because there was some good information in there. I put some dates in the chat regarding our upcoming events from LexCAN, and we have a very exciting year. The time is now. We're approaching COP26 in November, where the globe is going to come together and tell us what they plan to do, and we need to tell them what we want them to do, just like we need to tell our select board members, tell our senators and representatives and all our other decision-making bodies within our towns, what is it we want? What is it we need in order to address climate change at this time? There is so much work to be done. And with everybody here tonight, I feel very hopeful that we are on a path to making the changes that we need. So thank you all for coming. It's been a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you again. Thanks again.